The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School. Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. On today's episode, Trident Room host Jeremy Fredrichsdorf sits down with Paul Johnson.
Hello everyone, this is Captain Jeremy Fredrichsdorf with the Trident Room Podcast here at Naval Postgraduate School. And with me today I have Lieutenant Paul Johnson, a Surface Warfare Officer in the United States Navy. He's currently an instructor at Surface Warfare Schools Command, where he teaches maritime warfare for the Advanced Division Officer course. All right, Paul, can you tell me a little bit about your naval career?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Jeremy. So commissioned back in 2018, went through the NROTC program at Penn State, where I studied mechanical engineering, and then spent the first 3 years of my time in the Navy out in Rota, Spain, where I was with the USS DONALD COOK. And while we were working there, we did a couple of joint combined operations for Europe and Africa, including ballistic missile defense for Task Force 65. And then we also, for my second tour, moved back to San Diego on the USS COWPENS, where we worked through an extensive service life extension program.
And now you're in Newport, Rhode Island?
That's correct. So just got here and be here for about the next 3 years or so, working through the teaching staff and all the first tour division officers looking to transition and make their way to their second ships now.
Nice. All right. So the reason why we're talking today and why I wanted to have you on is I've obviously seen a couple videos of you on Instagram where you have a beard and uniform, and
Yep.
have been asked so many questions by my fellow friends like, oh, who's that guy in that video that you're with that has a beard? And so I just wanted to ask you blatantly, like, what is the deal with the beards?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's always a lot of fun to talk about. So obviously, facial hair in the U.S. military isn't really much of a thing. The only way that you're really going to see someone have facial hair or beards, is if either A, they're on leave, or B, they have a valid excuse, whether that is a religious exemption or a medical exemption. So it's something that a lot of people have had questions about, and eventually those questions and those concerns have made its way up to the top of the chain of command for the Navy, the administrative side here. And the SecNav actually back in July or so this past year said, hey, we hear all the complaints. Let's get some more information on this, because typically the argument you hear about beards and facial hair is either that it's unprofessional or that we can't have them in the military because the hair would affect your ability to seal a mask for firefighting, or in the case of a chemical attack. So he ordered this study to try and figure out, is there really any impact from facial hair and being able to seal a mask? And that's what we took a look at.
So it started with the Secretary of the Navy. I guess my next question would be, was it specific people that were chosen based on their background or things like that? Or was it just the ship that you were on while you were in San Diego that was picked?
It ended up being just the ship that I was on. So my ship in San Diego, the COWPENS, again, went through an extensive a yard period and maintenance period, going on multiple years now. So the crew that's there, we're not necessarily doing a lot of active underways per se. So we're a great platform to try and get some testing done on these firefighting masks and these chemical attacks, since we're not really deploying in our current situation. The commander of Naval Surface Forces Pacific identified us, as well as another ship out there, one of the LCSs, one of the littoral combat ships, to get some volunteers from each of our crews to conduct this study.
So when you say some volunteers, like how many people are we talking here?
They came and did a presentation for us, kind of explaining what the study was and what they're looking for, what they're trying to achieve, the data they're looking for. And I think it's hard to remember. I think their target was somewhere around at least 60 participants in this study. I would say that we probably had 30 to 40 from my ship participate, and probably, I think, a similar number coming from the other ship. Hard for me to say. I didn't really interact with the other ship too much.
When you say like they came to do a presentation, who were the people that were running this project?
The study itself was done by some personnel at the Naval Health Research Center and Warfighter Performance Lab.
Were there any like specific requirements for those 60 people that were participating? Like for example, myself, I cannot grow facial hair other than maybe on my neck. So, were there any requirements like you have to be able to grow a beard to even be able to participate in the study?
Well, that was kind of the joke going around the ship. Because personally, I've throughout college could never grow facial hair, and I didn't really think I could because I've also been shaving the whole time in the military. So when I put my name in the hat to participate in this study, definitely a lot of jokes flying around that I was never going to grow and that I was wasting my time. Um, and luckily, it did grow, but we did have a couple people participating that just had some random strands of hair sticking out of their chin. But really, it wasn't so much a limit on or requirement on who could participate. It was more so, hey, these are the requirements during the study. Are you willing to meet these requirements and these standards throughout the duration of the study? And if so, we'll look at having you participate.
So, what exactly were like the standards that you're talking about? Like, did you just grow a beard for as wildly as you could? Was there a trimming period, or how did that work?
Yeah, it was. So it started in July 2022. Um, the study itself was aimed to take about 4 months or so. Um, and really, all we had to do was start growing the facial hair. We couldn't do anything with it in terms of trimming it or anything like that. We just had to let it grow and try to get as much length on it as we could. Uh, the pretty average growing rate is about half an inch of hair a month. And so that's why we were looking at about a 4 month time period. Half an inch over 4 months gives us kind of the 2 inches of hair that really the study was trying to target in terms of the maximum length that they were actually looking at.
So about 4 months of facial hair growth. So like you said at the beginning, of the reason why it often seems like we're not allowed to have facial hair, it's because some consider it unprofessional, some consider it other things. I guess my question for these 4 months where you're growing out your beards, how did it affect your daily life at work?
Really no impact at all. Um, while we were doing the study and not having any results of it yet, we had to make some adjustments to things such as watch bills, where not knowing what the effect of the beard with mask sealing was, people who were participating in the study, we avoided having them on, our damage control response teams for firefighting and things like that throughout the ship. But really, other than that, there was no impact to daily life other than just walking around in uniform and getting a lot of weird looks from people because you've got this scraggy looking thing on your face walking around that they're not used to seeing.
Well, I guess how was the opinion of people on the ship? Let's before we start going to other people.
Everybody on the ship seemed to be thought it was pretty fun and pretty exciting. So there was about, I would say, 30 or 40 of us on the ship doing it, and it kind of became a little bit of a competition between us. We're all throwing jabs at each other, trying to see whose looks the best, who's growing in the best, and really it was just kind of a good time and a good morale and bonding moment for everybody that was participating in the study together. And anybody who wasn't doing the study was unaffected by it, so it didn't really matter too much to them.
Was there any complaints from anyone, like people that weren't participating, or even women that realized that they might have some things that they would like to have expanded, that realized there wasn't any studies being done for them?
No, I don't think there was any, as you say, being upset with the study. Regardless of gender or anything like that, people were pretty excited to see that the Navy was taking steps to try and say, hey, this is a concern for sailors and throughout the fleet. Let's take a look at it, and maybe it's something that we could potentially change in the future. So I don't think anybody was necessarily upset with it that it was happening. I know specifically speaking with some of my peers on the ship who majority of my peers for the division officers were female. They thought the study was pretty cool, and interestingly enough, talking to them, it started springing up conversation about things like, well, if we're looking at something like beards, what about items such as the policy on ponytails, fingernails, or earrings? Which, funny enough, now Navy has updated policy recently, allowing females a lot more liberty in terms of how they can wear their earrings at work. So I think we're looking at kind of both aspects of this. I don't think one side or the other was really too upset by the fact that we're doing it.
Yeah, which seems to be a good thing. Like, I guess my question for it next would be, how did other people perceive it? Because obviously you were on a military base in San Diego,
Yep.
where there's a lot of military around.
Hmm.
We went to the Navy Ball in the fall, where there's obviously a
Yep.
lot of higher ranking individuals, and you still had the beard at that time. And how did other military members, specifically in the Navy, how was their perception of it, and did you have any issues with them?
So throughout the entire study, not once did anybody ever ask me why I had a beard or what was going on. They provided us with some documentation. If that arose that said, "Hey, they're a part of this study directed by the SecNav. Uh, they're exempt from these grooming standards. You have any issues, reach out to this point of contact." So we had that documentation. Like I said, interesting enough, nobody ever asked me about the beard or anything else during the study. I definitely got a lot of weird looks. There was one point where I went to the Pentagon for a retirement ceremony, pretty much at the end of the study, where I had the full 2 inches. And walking around there, like you said, a lot of high-ranking officials, a lot of stairs. At one point, there was some two-star admiral almost falling over the side of the escalator, leaning over to watch me go by. But still, nobody really said anything to me. So I think there's definitely a lot of concerns, but none of them were voiced to me directly.
So you say that nothing was voiced to you directly. Were there any complaints that were sent out, like towards your ship, like to the captain of the ship, saying like, "Hey, I've seen your sailors in uniform wearing beards. Why is this happening?"
There were a couple, specifically for that incident at the Pentagon. Um, a lot of email chains started flying around, people asking, trying to figure out, okay, who's this guy with the beard? Why is he walking around like that? He can't be doing that. Um, and the fact of that was just a lot of people had no idea that we were doing this study. Um, and after enough conversations, everything kind of got, hey, we know Pac Fleet's doing this. Uh, Pac Fleet, yup, this ship's doing it. And my XO responding, like, yes, we've got these sailors, they're doing this study. They're authorized to do this thing. And really, I never had to deal with any of that. It was all kind of dealt with at the executive XOCO level. And they were on board with the study. They're like, hey, we're doing this thing. Not a big deal. Our sailors are going to keep doing their thing, and that's about it.
Yeah. I guess my question would also be for that would be, so this came down from SecNav. Do you have any idea of why SecNav started the study? Like, was it an individual that reached out through his chain of command saying like, "Hey, I think we really should be allowed to have beards on it. Have you ever done a study on this?" Or was it really just a top-down SecNav saying, "Why do we still have beards? Let's do a study on it."
I can't say. I just don't know the information. What was presented to us was that we're doing this study to determine how beards affect the mask seals. It's coming directed by the Secretary of the Navy, and that's really all the information that we've had on it so far. So I don't know, as to your question, whether it's, hey, there's individuals that are asking about it. If it's something that the SecNav said, hey, I want to take a look at this. This is a concerning item to me. I don't know that information, unfortunately.
So speaking of impact, since you started this kind of on Instagram, sort of kind of being more of an influencing role overall and growing your following, did you have any reach out from individuals asking you questions about what was going on with the study, like positive, negatives? Can you talk about that?
All sorts. um, yeah, so posting a couple of videos about my experience growing the beard and interactions I've had growing the beard definitely has received a lot of feedback, I guess you could say. I've had all sorts of comments on things, from the positive, hey, this is really awesome, I appreciate you doing this is an issue that I face personally, all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, where you've got individuals who, let their mind loose on the internet and say some pretty interesting things on the negative side. Uh, that's within the comments. I've also received a lot of personal messages about it, and really the personal messages are pretty much all positive. It's mostly people who are curious about the study, asking some more questions, or people who are saying, hey, like, I really appreciate you doing this. This is facial hair for some people is a really big deal, both religiously as well as with medical issues. So they're actually very grateful that, this type of thing's happening, and they're thankful that people are taking a look at it.
So after the 4 months of growing the beards, what did the end results look like? Like, walk me through, after those 4 months, what did you guys do and how did you test to see if the beards were a problem or not?
When we were growing the hair, we were pretty much left on our own. We did check-ins with the staff. They would come and the researchers would measure the hair, see how well it was growing, ask us if we were having any personal issues with growing the hair, anything like that, just kind of do a check-in and see how things were going. Once we hit that final check-in, they're like, okay, you're at your 2 inches. We're going to get you scheduled here to do the testing. It was a pretty smooth process. They scheduled a day with us. We'd come in as groups, and we would sit down. They'd have a professional barber come in, basically line everything up, trim it up to a nice round 2 inches all the way across the face, and then we would go through this process of testing where they'd hook us up to it's a normal, SCBA firefighting mask and CBR for the chemical masks, but they had these special sensors attached on the front of them that measured the number of particles in the air versus the number of particles contained within the mask. So they'd put us in this room. They would be basically a particle generator within the room, and they would measure those levels to compare. Those masks would then be hooked up to a computer, reading all those levels, and then we would perform different activities such as normal breathing, turning the head side to side, bending over, leaning forward and back, head nodding, all sorts of things like that, talking, and they would measure how these numbers of particles within the mask responded to those different activities, and in comparison to the ambient particles, to actually determine how well that mask was sealing on our face during those different activities. Once we did that the testing for the 2 inches, we'd go back to the barber and we'd actually do a trim down. So we tested everything at 2 inches, 1/4 inch, 1/8 inch, and then we did our clean shave test baseline to see how our results, if they've changed at all since we first got tested with the clean shave back in July.
So you said you went from 2 inches straight to a 1/4 inch?
Yeah, so the way that the Navy's policy is written right now for exemptions for shaving or for beards is that what you'll typically see is if there's a medical exemption, say like pseudofolliculus barbulitis, I really struggle with that one. PFB is, for the ingrown hairs or face getting ripped up from the shaving, is usually they'll get about a 1/4 inch exemption for the beards. When you look at the religious side, the religious exemption is for up to 2 inches right now. And so that's what they were curious about is, hey, with our current standards at the 2 inches and the 1/4 inch, what would be the effect of putting masks on the sailors? So we really didn't test anything between the 2 and 1/4 inches, which is a significant difference. We just took a look at those major benchmarks, and then they also checked the 1/8 inch as well as back to our clean shave baseline.
Okay, so from that jump, at least for your personal, were you able to see your personal results based on the different lengths?
Yeah, we got while we were doing the test, we were getting immediate feedback from the computer and the system. Personally, I did not pass at the 2 inches of hair, but I did pass at the 1/4 inch and the 1/8 inch, and of course the clean shave. At least for other people, I don't have the data. They're still working on the final reports and all that to get worked up to the SecNav. But there were a couple of people that passed at the 2 inches of hair, but it was definitely kind of hit or miss for what we were seeing just talking with each other.
Do you think they should have done some different lengths in between the 2 inch and the quarter-inch to see what the results would have, if the results would have been different?
Um, I think it would have been interesting to have that information. I think mostly it's because we're working with a pretty constrained timeline for the testing. Just to do test one mask at one length of hair would take us 30 to 35 minutes. So to do all the testing in one shot with no breaks for everything the way it was set was 4 to 5 hours, and they had a lot of people to get through with the testing. So I think that it might have been some useful information, but I think they still achieved their goal of testing, hey, these are the benchmarks that exist right now. What would that effect be?
So, you guys, when was this? When was the end of the study done? Like, when did this occur?
You talking in terms of like the testing for the beards?
Yeah, when did the testing happen?
We did the testing. I think we wrapped it up end of November 2022. There were a few stragglers I think that they had to catch in the beginning of December, but all the testing was taken and completed back in November, end of November, beginning of December timeframe.
So for that, did you guys hear what the result, like what the timeline will be for the results and what the potential impacts will be for policies?
The timeline, I think, is what we were initially told was that the report was supposed to be on the SecNav's desk by end of January. It sounds like that may have been shifted a little bit, and that it might be February now. But the report is still being worked on, still being kind of touched up, and it will be getting to the SecNav here in the very near future. In terms of policy, I can't really speak to that. I'm not the definitely not the policy guy for the Navy. But if I had to say, my personal opinion, or at least from what I've seen and from talking with all the other individuals that we did the study with, it's hard for me to argue against beards because I know that I've been able to pass at the quarter-inch, and also having a beard, at least for the professional argument, there's really not a lot to be said about beards being unprofessional. Um, Time may have been at one point, but times change throughout the years, policies change, public perception change. So I think that once we get this report up, and depending on what those final results are, again, I can only really speak for what I've experienced and a couple other people I've talked to experienced during the study is I think the Navy would be hard pressed to at least not consider making some policy changes.
Yeah, and speaking of that, having been here at NPS now, where we have, or Naval Postgraduate School, where we have international students, which other militaries, it seems, allows their militaries to grow beards. It has been, they're all of the utmost professional individuals. And I'm wondering, have you had experiences with other navies in the past that were allowed to grow beards and how those interactions have been?
Yeah, certainly. I mean, when I was overseas in Spain, like we would work with pretty much operating independently as a ship, but we would work with a lot of these other countries, whether it's Spain, Italy. I've worked with some Australians, uh, Great Britain. A lot of these navies all have facial hair, and it's really not an issue for them. Uh, Specifically, we had a Spanish navigator on our ship for a while, kind of getting to experience what we do here on the U.S. vessels, as well as a chance for him to, kind of share some knowledge for us to learn from him on what his country does. And he was honestly very surprised to see that we don't allow any sort of facial hair. So I think it's becoming more and more pronounced that, hey, beards, facial hair, whatever you may have it doesn't really impact at all someone's ability to do their job and do it well. I think the only question that exists these days is there an effect with the mask and being able to seal with hair, which is what the entire goal of the study was to accomplish.
Which, with when it comes to beards, I can at least somewhat see the argument for, you know, if you have to wear a gas mask and if the gas mask becomes ineffective, that there is a reason to maintain that we're not allowed to have beards or only a certain length of it. But
Absolutely.
let's talk about like other issues. For example, the Marine Corps recently allowed full sleeve tattoos again. I
Hmm.
know we have issues frequently with haircuts and hair lengths. I believe the Navy and I think even the Marine Corps, with women allowed to be painting their fingernails in different colors. I guess my question for you is, what is your opinion on those kinds of issues and how that impacts professionalism?
Yeah, I think a lot of those are definitely a lot of social issues, and I think we're getting to a point uh, where we're starting to realize that social aspect doesn't really have a lot of impact on, as we said, the professionalism and the ability of that sailor or that Marine to do that job. You talked about the full sleeve tattoos for the Marines, which I think is awesome. Another really cool step forward because within the Navy, right, full sleeve tattoos, I can do parts of my neck, I can do my hands, um, and to be quite honest, some of the best sailors that I've worked with in the Navy, uh, most tattoos I more tattoos I could probably even count, right? All over the place. But it doesn't affect them, doesn't affect their ability to do their job and be a professional in their field. And so I think that those are positive steps that Navy, Marine Corps, whether it's tattoos, beards, fingernails, that we're taking. Um, and while it doesn't seem like much, I think it's pretty big steps in terms of being able to improve day-to-day life, morale, which ultimately impacts the ability of the force to go forth and accomplish the mission.
Do you think that, because I think that this is coming back to my point here, that the study that you guys conducted with beards was important because there might be an actual operational impact. Do you think that a study like that has to be conducted for each of these social issues that we are currently confronting, or do you think that there are certain things that we can just agree on? This is something that we've done traditionally, but it's also something that doesn't impact us operationally that we can get rid of.
I think the majority of them, you don't need to order or complete some type of study on for that operational impact. I think the beards was a good one to do this with because being able to affect somebody's respiratory system and do what they need to do, whether that's smoke and fighting a fire or a chemical attack, right? That can have very drastic um, both health and operational consequences. Whereas if I look at something like the color of my fingernails, right, I'd be hard pressed to be able to make an argument on how that could operationally uh, affect the mission that I'm completing. And so I think in a lot of those instances, there's really no need to do a study on it. I think what we have to take a look at is, as a service, can we identify this as an issue that you know we think we should be talking about? Which the sailors and Marines will bring up those issues. They'll address them, and you just got to listen to them. Um, and then look, okay, personally, I'm pretty indifferent to the fingernails. If I want to paint my fingernails a certain color, it makes no difference to doing the job and doing the mission. So I think those types of social aspects and social changes are just something that we have to say, hey, you know what? Times have changed. What may or may not be perceived as professional has changed, and maybe we can make a look at making these changes to policy.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with that. I guess my question is also with the beards. Um, it's been so long. I mean, I don't know how often, or like how long ago it started that we weren't allowed to have beards. I mean, like, was the Navy ever allowed to have beards in the past?
Yeah, so there was a pretty decent amount of time. I can't remember exact dates off the top of my head right now, but we had them for a pretty good period through the late 90s, and it didn't become official Navy policy to not have beards until the 80s or so. I want to say like 84 or 85. But until that point, a lot of facial hair and beards in the Navy. You go back and look at Navy was first founded back in the 1700s and then into early 1800s and beyond. Yeah, I mean, you look back at naval history. back when we were founded in the late 1700s, time through the 1800s, 1900s, etc., sailors and beards have honestly existed pretty well with each other. There's definitely been periods where they haven't had them, they've had them. Most recently, I think that people could recall back is we had them for a pretty good amount of time in the mid to late 1900s, and it wasn't until I think 84, 85 that the Navy policy came down and said, "Hey, we are clean shaven. We're getting rid of beards and facial hair. This is going to be the new naval policy." And it hasn't been since then that things have really changed. So you take a look at that. It's like what 40 years ago now. So it might be time to take a look at those things and see, hey, maybe it's time that we can bring back facial hair, bring back beards, and take a look at those policies.
And I guess my next question for that, and I just want your personal opinion on this, is with it potentially having an impact on, a gas mask or things like that, should we potentially look at the options that if you are in those billets or deployment or underway, that you have to maintain those standards, and while you're, back at home on shore duty, that you would be allowed at those times to grow out a beard?
So my personal opinion on it is that regardless of the results of the study, right? Because the study is looking at, hey, how can I seal a mask with facial hair? I think regardless of the study, I see no reason why a sailor or marine or any branch really who's on a shore duty type billet where, such as myself, I'm going to the schoolhouse every day. I come back and that's the end of it. Someone working in those positions, administrative positions, all sorts of things like that are based here in the U.S. with really no operational concerns for fighting fires daily or a chemical attack. I see no reason that facial hair and beards can't exist for those billets. I think the second part of that is what you said with about maybe there's additional restrictions for sailors who are in a sea duty status or in a flight status where they're flying and they need to be able to have access to efficiently and quickly put a mask on, or they're on a ship and they have to quickly don a firefighting mask. I think that's what the focus of this study is, and pending positive results and the ability to seal a mask from the final conclusion of this study, I think you can look at making policies in some way that, okay, maybe you can't have the world's largest beard on your face when you're in those operational billets, but maybe there's a point, say that 1/8 inch, that 1/4 inch, that what, hey, we're seeing success at this length. Maybe I'm not seeing success at the full 2 inches, but at least for those sailors that are in those sea duty or flight status billets, maybe they can have up to that 1/8 inch, that 1/4 inch during that time. And you know what? Hey, when you get back to a shore duty, something less operational where you're not facing those daily operational concerns, then we can grow things out a little bit more within whatever standard or policy is set for what you can grow.
Yeah, I guess the potential issues that you'll always have at that point is one, creating an us versus them kind of mentality, where you have the individuals that are, for us, the people that are constantly going to the field or that are deployed, that are upset that people that never deploy or never go to the field are able to grow out their facial hair, potentially creating like, that us versus them mentality. And then I guess the other thing you'd have to be careful of is, how much extra work are you putting at that point on, senior enlisted and other, junior officers that have to correct those kinds of things when it's like, someone is growing or is always on the edge of they're an 1/8 inch, that's all they're allowed, and they, push the limit a little bit and go to like a 1/4 inch. That's another thing that you
Sure.
have to enforce.
Yeah, I mean, I could see there being some animosity, between, hey, this guy's, on a shore duty based billet and gets to grow out more hair than me. Um, but at the same time, I think being able to take that step and say, hey, these are the requirements. Uh, when you're in this position, this is what you have to follow. I mean, rules such as that and those requirements already exist. I just don't think it's you see it as superficial as seeing facial hair on somebody's face. So definitely items of concern. And I think that comes down to, time. If we establish some sort of policy, nobody ever likes change. Um, Eventually, the change will come to be accepted, and it's something that we'll just have to work through. And maybe we have to course correct and adjust a couple of things. But ultimately, I don't think that should be considered a limiting factor on saying, you know what, we just shouldn't allow beards at all because there might be some conflict between that.
Yeah, I think something that would be very important for this kind of, change into the future is just a good feedback loop of, junior Marines, junior sailors, the middle management sections, and even the senior leadership. Just constant feedback with the Secretary of the Navy kind of office to understand these are the impacts that we're having, and then making the changes of policy based off of that feedback.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, Paul, really appreciate you talking to me about the whole beer study. I guess my question now is like, what are your future plans now that you're on a legit shore duty and teaching young sailors?
Well, I'll tell you what, it's definitely been quite a life change and a lot slower paced. So I'm getting used to all that change, getting settled in here, finding I have a lot more time on my hands now than I did uh, being operational on the ships. So personally, been dealing with a lot of that and a lot of other things, and working through things with a lot of running. So been building up my running, looking here to start competing in some more ultra marathons, a couple 100 milers. Really one of my big pastimes there. And eventually, uh, working with my chain of command right now, but I have a pretty lofty goal right now where I'm going to run across the country from San Diego to Newport, Rhode Island. So we're working on some planning for that and see if we can kind of make that a joint venture with the Navy. But that's kind of what we're looking at here for the next 1 to 2 years.
As a logistics officer, I'm happy I don't have to plan the logistics for that kind of trip.
Yeah, it's going to be a handful, but it should be pretty interesting if we can get some buy off on this and get the ball rolling on it.
I'll say this, Paul, if anyone can do it, I'm sure it's you.
Well, I appreciate that.
All right, Paul, I really appreciate your time and thank you so much for being here today with me.
Absolutely. Great talking with you, and glad we got some interesting topics today.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/Trident Room Podcast.